Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridoluale. The headlines. Former U.S. President Donald Trump says he can end the, quote, disastrous war between Russia and Ukraine. International partners gather in Lviv as Ukraine holds three-day conference on war crimes. And Russian forces continue their efforts to encircle the eastern city of Bakhmut. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has addressed the annual Conservative Political Action Conference over the weekend in Washington, where he said he was the only candidate who could end World War III, as he called it. Mr. Trump, who said he has a great relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin, also stressed that he would have the disastrous war between Russia and Ukraine settled quickly if he was re-elected president.
I'm the only candidate who can make this promise. I will prevent, and very easily, World War III, very easily. And you're going to have World War III, by the way. You're going to have World War III. If something doesn't happen fast, you're going to have World War III. Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, I will have the disastrous war between Russia and Ukraine settled. It will be settled quickly. I will get the problem solved, and I will get it solved in rapid order, and it will take me no longer than one day. I know exactly what to say to each of them. I got along very well with them. I got along very well with Putin, even though I'm the one that ended his pipeline. Remember, they said, Trump is giving a lot to Russia. Really? Putin actually said to me, if you're my friend, I'd hate like hell to see you as my enemy. We put up $140 billion, and they put up just a tiny fraction of that. And, you know, we all want to see success, but it's far more important to them than it is to us. Democrat prosecutors, oh, they're after me for so many things. Oh, those prosecutors. Some are racists, some hate our country. They all hate me. They'll get me for anything, anything. You put a comma in this paragraph. Why did you do that? I don't really know.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump and the President of the European Parliament has visited the western Ukrainian city of Lviv as a three-day war crimes conference was being held there. The three-day conference was organized by Ukrainian authorities, quote, to ensure accountability for core international crimes allegedly committed in Ukraine. The Parliament President, Roberta Metsola, told journalists at a briefing that those responsible for war crimes committed in Ukraine need to pay.
About accountability. Whoever is responsible for these crimes needs to pay, and that means that if we find jurisdiction for the crime of aggression, then we need to find the legal means to do it. We have seen extremely good proposals on the table. We will meet with the United Nations personnel. We need to make sure that we have the mechanisms, first of all, to collect the evidence, but then to prosecute them. We understand that in order to make sure that Article 8 bis of the Rome Statute, in other words, that the crime of aggression is covered, then the special tribunal needs to be created. It is no longer a matter of how, it is a matter of when. And even now that we see already the cases that are being prosecuted in Ukraine, the information that is being gathered by different member states, by the United States, by the United Kingdom, it is about bringing persons accountable, including Vladimir Putin, to justice. Without that, we will not have peace. If we cannot find the legal solution to this, and here I talk about as a lawyer, then we would have failed Ukraine. Not only Ukraine, we would have failed everybody in this world who wants to make sure that when crimes of aggression are perpetrated on the territory of our Europe, then they are prosecuted. In terms of modalities, the UN, of course, needs to be involved. We have seen the International Criminal Court that has brought forward different ideas. The question remains, how can we manage with the waiver or the lifting of immunity. Once we reach or overcome that hurdle, then we can manage. The only thing that I don't want to see is that we get stuck at that hurdle and we find ourselves at yet another conference and we would not have found a solution.
European Parliament President Roberta Metsola speaking there. But she also met with Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky in Lviv. Ms. Metsola vowed that the perpetrators of war crimes will be punished when Ukraine wins the war. Speaking on a panel at the United for Justice conference, Ms. Metsola reiterated the Parliament's support for initiatives in collecting evidence of potential crimes committed by Moscow and its forces. And staying with the War Crimes Conference, Ukraine's First Lady Olena Zelenska took part in a panel discussion on sexual violence. Ms. Zelenska said the Ukraine's prosecutor's office was investigating 171 cases of sexual violence committed by Russian troops in Ukraine.
The aggressors that have started a war on our continent will not go unpunished. I am the mother of 4 sons. I would like to be able to tell them, when Ukraine wins the war, that everybody will be held accountable for the crimes that they have committed and the atrocities that we have seen committed against the brave Ukrainians.
And Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu got busy as he paid a rare visit to Ukraine's forces deployed in, to Russia's forces rather, deployed in Ukraine. The country's defense minister said in a statement that the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, General of the Army Sergei Shoigu, inspected the forward command post of one of the formations of the Eastern Military District in the South Donetsk direction. Video footage shows General Shoigu awarding medals to Russian military personnel and touring a ruined town with the Eastern Military's District Commander, Colonel General Rustam Muradov. Russia's top military chiefs have visited the front line in Ukraine only sparingly since Russia sent tens of thousands of troops into the country in what it calls a special military operation over a year ago. Meanwhile, General Shoigu also met with senior commanders, including the Chief of the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, and General Sergei Surovikin, one of Gerasimov's deputies in the Ukraine campaign. The meeting discussed issues of providing troops with weapons, military equipment and ammunition, as well as issues of combat training of reserve units. General Shoigu, who has served as defense minister since 2012, has come under harsh criticism of his performance from those who back Russia's actions in Ukraine, with the Wagner Group boss Yevgeny Prigozhin last month accusing him and others of treason. And Russian forces are continuing their efforts to encircle the eastern city of Bakhmut in the Donetsk region. The city sits towards the northeast of the Donetsk region, about 13 miles from Luhansk, and has been a target for Mr. Putin's forces for some time. Since last summer, the city has been a stone's throw from the front lines, so its capture would represent a long sought-after success for Moscow's forces and bring some limited strategic value. The city has important road connections to other parts of the Donetsk region, eastwards to the border with Luhansk, northwest to Sloviansk, and southwest to Konstantinivka. For several weeks, the routes into Bakhmut have gradually come under the control of Russian forces. Rather than drive directly towards the city center, Wagner groups sought to encircle the city in a wide arc from the north. Several residents have fled because of the violence. China has set an official economic growth target of around 5% for 2023 as it seeks to revive the world's second largest economy after a year of tepid growth because of pandemic measures. It will also, more importantly, expand its defense budget by 7.2%, marking an increase over growth the previous year. Both figures for the coming year were released at the opening of the annual gathering of the National People's Congress, the country's legislature, which draws nearly 3,000 delegates to Beijing for the next 8 days. The economy added more than 12 million urban jobs last year, with the urban unemployment rate falling to 5.5 to 5.5%, according to the work report, which emphasized China's focus on ensuring stable growth, employment, and prices amidst global inflation, and set a GDP target. China also unveiled its annual military budget for 2023, which will be about $224 billion in a draft budget report released yesterday. Let's talk now to Stephen Hayes, President Emeritus of the Corporate Council on Africa, as well as former President, International Center on International Leadership. Mr. Hayes, good morning to you. Nice to see you once again. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Lottie.
Yes, indeed. Today you're joining us, of course, from New Brunswick in Canada. So let me begin with home, as it were. Former President Donald Trump is on the campaign stump. Of course, he's seeking to be re-elected as president come next year's presidential election. And he says he can end this war in a day. He knows what to say. He's quite close to both parties, he says, and that, you know, if that doesn't happen and happen soon, there's going to be World War III. What do you make of that?
Well, I would challenge his statement that he's close to both parties. Certainly, he's not close to Ukraine. He's done everything he can to undermine our relationship with Ukraine. So I don't also think that he can end it in one day if he were to be president. This is going to be a long struggle. It's also, I think, something that's going to take many, many days, probably months, to resolve. I think Mr. Trump is Mr. Trump, and is taken seriously by his followers and not so seriously by others. And certainly he's had a warm relationship with Russia and Putin, whom he has admittedly very openly said he admired. So I don't take Donald Trump's statement very seriously.
But do you think it complicates a policy direction in the United States, generally speaking? Because as you point out, he does have his supporters, and perhaps, you know, this issue of mixed messaging, so many of those I've spoken to say he's got a real chance of being reelected in spite of all the legal troubles next year. I mean, depending on what happens with others within the Republican Party, but that he's still got the party, you know, in his hands, and that if anyone's going to be the candidate, it's likely to be him, except something really important goes wrong.
Well, unless somebody with some courage in the Republican Party steps up to present a very serious challenge, that's true. I still think it's a long way off, but judging from the recent convention of the Conservative Political Action Caucus, certainly you'd think that he's going to be the next candidate. But again, the attendance at that conference was dwindling. So I think that it's still too early to put a lot of emphasis on it. But to your question, does it complicate things? Yep, yes, it does. If the Republicans tend to remain timorous in terms of challenging Mr. Trump, then yes, it's going to put a lot of pressure on the Biden administration for a starter, and it's also going to bring into question, to what extent, I don't think we can know, but it will bring into question our relationship with Ukraine. So I think that he poses right now a potential threat. There's no way that in one day he's going to bring peace to all. So I think that he's a concern. It is going to complicate things, because if the Republican Party thinks that he's going to be the president, they're going to be reluctant to step out, and particularly that'd be a concern in the Senate.
Indeed. Let's come to the other, you know, there's always the tendency that when things like this happen, other things get to slip by. While all that was going on in the United States, right across the world, another potential adversary of the United States, and who is playing an active role in the conflict in Ukraine, is China. And China released its defense budget, which has gone up significantly, more than 7% increase. We know that, you and I both know that China is rapidly building aircraft carriers, fighter jets, and so on, even though there has been no stated objective for this rapid buildup. Is there reason, do you think, to be worried, especially with everything else that is going on?
I think there's dozens of reasons to be worried, particularly in this world, given everything that's going on, ranging from the normal issues of climate change and so forth. But in terms of China, yes, I still tend to think that reasoned heads will prevail between U.S. and China, particularly as long as the rhetoric can be toned down some. But you're right, China has been it's not simply very quickly, but China has been building up for some time. The creation of the islands in the South China Sea, which is has been an irritant, more than an irritant, the concern to Vietnam, Philippines, and others are now being converted to military bases. So there is a big concern as to what they're going to do. But again, the Chinese and the U.S. economy has been tied so closely together. I think it's going to be very, very precarious, not only for the United States and others, but also for China to simply abruptly break those ties. So I think that a stronger dialogue is needed between the United States and China.
Indeed. I was reading something where it was pointed out that, you know, when the United States was in this kind of situation with the former Soviet Union, the trade between both was not really that much, about $2 billion a year. But in the case of the United States and China, that $2 billion would only account for the trade for a day between the U.S. and China. Right. So we are talking about a huge trade relationship. And as you pointed out, quite a number of people have said, look, the rhetoric is there, you know, and there's reason to be cautious, but that at the end of the day, economics will trump whatever else there is that is being talked about. We're talking about the world's, you know, biggest economy and the second biggest economy here. So now you're an expert in this field, and so I want to find out from you, are we setting too much store by the trade relationship in such a way that we are ignoring perhaps the potential that may not prevent a military conflict, particularly over a place like Taiwan?
I think you're right. It may not prevent a conflict. There's a number of things that could trigger that. We can start with the North Korea. They did something rash, China would come to the support of North Korea, we would come to the support of South Korea, Japan, and so forth. So it doesn't take much right now to trigger the conflict. I think that to say that the economic relationship is so strong that it guarantees there won't be a conflict is wrong. Certainly the economic relationship is strong. To have that break would damage China severely. As well as the United States, but it could break. There's no doubt about it. There's just any number of miscalculations. Taiwan, again, I think that there are a lot of people in the United States that think that China will invade Taiwan. I will still think not. It would damage, I think, China too much as well, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense. I think that China has had historically a long-term view on Taiwan. Again, it depends on the leadership of China, and that again is right now at question as well. There certainly is a leader, but what is in his mind needs to be more accountable, I think.
Let's bring all that back to the conflict in Ukraine, though. And of course, as you and I both know, China and Russia have what is essentially a very good relationship at the moment. Ukraine is backed by the United States and the West. Again, and I think that's what former President Donald Trump was referring to, that eventually the way this is going, we are going to have to settle it militarily one way or the other, and we're not talking about Ukraine. We're talking about the really big powers that are involved in this. Do you see that too?
This is much more than just the Ukraine-Russia war. If there is to be a total military victory, then I think there's going to have to be involvement from the West much more strongly. That involvement, though, could trigger Russia to do something far more than they've done so far. So I think we're in a very precarious state right now. It's really, I think, where Mr. Putin's mind is. I think that also can the West keep together, because they've got 4 problem countries that I think really are within the alliance that have to be managed very carefully. That's Turkey, obviously, who's played a role maybe at times it seems almost pro-Russian. Switzerland, which won't allow their defense products to be sold out, because I think that because there's $41 billion of Russian money in Swiss banks. Hungary certainly, and then Germany, because of its reticence, independence, which is being reduced, fortunately, on energy. So I think it's very, very complex right now. I think that the alliance is still together. I hope it holds together, but if there's to be a total military victory, then I think that it takes us right to and perhaps beyond the brink of a far greater war.
Well, before I let you go, Stephen, I must ask you about this, because again, I do know that you have a good background in this. The Russians come into this, or at least the Russian leadership comes into this with a big advantage, because Russian President Vladimir Putin has been in power for so long, almost a quarter of a century, about 24, 25 years. And the country at that level is stable, whereas in the United States and most of the Western countries in NATO and the EU, there are all these regular elections. There are, frequent changes of leadership with new ideas, new agendas, and all of that. And they do have these patterns and currents. So over time, there is an element of stability from the Russian leadership, both in terms of political and military. That can be said for the West. Does that come into play at any point?
Well, certainly it comes into play, but also keep in mind that I've seen this as a parallel, often used the parallel of the pre-World War II. Keep in mind that Germany had very, very stable, totally undemocratic leadership as well, which seemingly gave it an advantage, but it didn't last. Putin has the parallels are interesting, because the Wagner Group is really Putin's SS, the stormtroopers that reported directly to Hitler, and the Wagner Group seems to report directly to Putin. You also have the mass rallies that Hitler had, and Putin has his own mass rally of which people come and to cheer on. I think Putin does have popular support right now. He certainly created, again, the historic paranoia that Russia has had, not simply for the last few years, but centuries, that they are the victims and they are being attacked and so forth. How long that rhetoric can last, I don't know. But I think it's not necessarily so that Putin has the advantage, because he's the dictator, and that does give a certain stability, but it's also destabilizing the economy of Russia, and he's destabilizing, I think, the unity, because there are dissidents, but of course those dissidents are being jailed, much like that happened in in Nazi Germany. So I think that you're right again to point that out. It's accurate, but and the West is in disarray to a certain extent, and it was in the 1930s as well. So I think this isn't the 1930s, but there are some interesting comparisons.
My final question, Stephen, has to do with those outliers that you mentioned in the Western alliance, the Turks, the Hungarians, just to mention two, who are not completely, on the same page with everybody else about how to deal with Russia and the whole question of energy dependence and all of that. Now, those countries that are in that group, small as a function of the number versus the majority, but because decisions at the level of NATO and the EU are have to be taken unanimously, they could be the flies, if you like, in the ointment. So one wonders, going forward, if they would play that role, or if they're just holding out for some, shall we say, blandishment, some advantage, which once they are given, then they come on board.
Well, they are the flies in the ointment. It's not even that they become, they are. Hungary has really blocked Finland and Sweden from joining NATO, and I think the only reason for that, frankly, is to support Russia. The last thing that Putin wants is NATO and Finland to be on his borders as a NATO country. Turkey, I think, is playing the game, as you suggest, for winning its own advantages too. They're asking of Sweden to outlaw or to kick out the PKK, the revolutionary party of Kurds within Turkey, and Sweden can't do that or won't do that, and so there is that advantage. But I also think that Turkey's still playing a slightly tilt towards Russia in all this, and I think NATO is going to have to decide: do they suspend them, as has been suggested, both Hungary and Turkey, so they can move forward? Otherwise, they're going to have a big problem containing Russia.
Indeed. Thank you so very much, Stephen Hayes, President Cohen and Woods International. You brought your expertise to bear, your perspective. Always interesting to speak with you. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. An honor as usual. Thank you.
And after the break, Latvian President Egil Levits meets with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Lviv to reaffirm support for Ukraine. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. The death toll of last week's early rocket strike on the southern Ukrainian city of Zaporizhzhia has risen to 13, and that's according to a Ukrainian official. According to the update, 5 people had been reported missing and 4 are in hospital. As of 11 a.m. local time on Sunday, rescuers in Zaporizhzhia continued to search for people under the rubble and dismantle dangerous elements of the building around the clock. On the day of the strike, Ukrainian authorities said a pregnant woman was among the people rescued from the building. And Ukraine is planning to use more than $460 million worth of assets seized from Russian banks to rebuild the country and compensate Ukrainians. That's according to Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal. Mr. Shmyhal said Ukraine is developing procedures for using the confiscated assets to help Ukrainian citizens and their communities recover in the wake of Russia's invasion. The government is working with allies to develop a system based on an international treaty which would help decide how to issue reparations to Ukrainians. The system will include an international register of losses from the war, a commission to consider applications for compensation, and a fund from which the compensation will be paid. And U.S. President Joe Biden and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz held talks which focused largely on the war in Ukraine, China, and other matters amid signs of strains between the transatlantic partners. Sitting next to Mr. Scholz in the Oval Office, President Biden thanked the German leader for his profound support on Ukraine. Mr. Biden hailed Mr. Scholz's decision to increase military spending and has worked in lockstep with the United States and other allies to support Ukraine.
You help Ukraine meet its basic needs like food, health, heating, and you continue to give them and I want to thank you, Olaf, for your strong and steady leadership. I mean that sincerely. It's made a world of difference. And together, we made good on our promise. You stepped up to provide critical military support. And, I would argue that beyond your military support, the moral support you gave to the Ukrainians has been profound. It's been profound.
And it's really important that we acted together, that we organized our lockstep, and that we made it feasible that we can give the necessary support to Ukraine during all this time. And at this time, I think it is very important that we give the message that we will continue to do so as long as it takes and as long as it is necessary, and that we are ready also for staying with the Ukrainians as long as it is necessary.
Promise you.
Meanwhile, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says closer relations with Russia will complicate Beijing's ties to Europe. Ms. Jean-Pierre's comments come as the United States sounds out close allies about the possibility of imposing sanctions on China if Beijing provides military support to Russia for its war in Ukraine. Neither Washington nor Berlin or any of the other partners says they have seen evidence of Beijing's provision of weapons to Moscow, but U.S. officials say they are monitoring the situation closely.
The president was in Ukraine, and he was also in Poland. There's constant communication with our allies that the president is having. They're not one-offs here. They are consistent and they are continuous. And so I just want to be very clear there. And look, we have said this over and over again. We have not, we have not seen any. We haven't seen China do anything yet as it relates to lethal weapons, and we believe that Russia's war in Ukraine has put China in a difficult position to actually move forward in that direction. Every step China takes towards Russia makes it harder for China with Europe and other countries around the world. But want to be really clear on that piece. But as I've mentioned before, Secretary Blinken met with Wang Yi just recently in Munich and made himself really clear. They had a very clear conversation, and keeping that communication, that line of communication open is very important to us as well. But again, we haven't seen China take that action yet, but we've been very clear and had conversations with China.
Meanwhile, the United States is working with Ukrainian pilots in to determine how long it would take to train them to fly F-16 fighter jets. 2 Ukrainian pilots are currently at a military base in the U.S. having their skills tested in flight simulators to see how much time they would need to learn to fly various U.S. aircraft, including the F-16s. A U.S. military official told reporters traveling with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin to the Middle East that the Ukrainian pilots were in Tucson, Arizona for a familiarization event that he described as a routine activity in their military-to-military dialogue with Ukraine. Ukraine has been pushing for the United States to provide fighter jets, arguing that they need them to defend against Russian missile and drone attacks. North Korea has called on the United Nations to demand an immediate halt to joint military drills by the United States and South Korea. In a statement in state media, Vice Foreign Minister Kim Sung-yong said the drills and the rhetoric from the allies have put tensions to an extremely dangerous level. He said the UN and the international community will have to strongly urge the US and South Korea to immediately halt their provocative remarks and joint military exercises. The statement comes after officials from Seoul and Washington announced more than 10 days of large-scale military exercises, including amphibious landings, from March the 13th to the 23rd. And Latvian President Igor Levits visited the western Ukrainian city of Lviv, where he met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Both presidents, accompanied by their wives, visited the cemetery of the defenders in Lviv and laid flowers in a tribute to fallen Ukrainian service members. Mr. Zelensky expressed gratitude for the decisiveness of Latvian support. Latvia has been one of the most active supporters of Ukraine during its year-long war with Russia, providing more than 370 million euros worth of military equipment and tens of thousands of euros in humanitarian aid.
Not only sanctions, but also accountability. And I will advocate for the establishment of an ad hoc international tribunal, since no other international court can currently try the crime of aggression. Of course, International Criminal Court is doing important work by gathering evidence of individual war crimes. But it is necessary also to try the crime of aggression, which is a leadership crime. And unfortunately, there is a crime in international law, but till now there is no international court which would be responsible to deal with this issue, to try this criminal.
The business news out of this conflict, and Ini John McQuad joins me. Good morning, Ini. Let's Russia-Africa relations. Vastly improvement, over the last couple of months. Several Russian officials have been visiting African countries. Sergei Lavrov was here.
He's been to South Africa twice this year
already,
and it's just March. We just started March, and it's twice, and it might be an improved relation. And remember, they had a drill.
Absolutely.
China, Russia, and South Africa. I think that was just last week. It might be an improved relation between Russia and Africa, because now they're also looking for how to improve ties with Zimbabwe. But it's also a worrying thing for Africa because of the secondary sanctions. Last week, it came up in the U.S. Congress, the threat of secondary sanction and what it could do to Africa, because Africa, unfortunately, is still very import dependent, both on the U.S. and in Russia's side. So I did hear Washington talking there about the difficult situation which China has been placed into, but it seems like Africa is also getting very close to that difficult situation, because who do you want to hurt, or who do you want to be on the wrong side? Is it the West, where you have U.S. and all of that, or is it Russia, which has, of course, also has a whole lot that is offering? And remember, there's that Russia-Africa summit.
Yes.
It's coming in July. Is it going to be aborted? Of course, the U.S. is threatening and talking against that, but will Africa succumb to it? Are they going to cut off that?
That's a difficult question.
Yes, it is. After we had a summit in Washington, Africa-U.S. summit in January. So, I mean, how will Africa handle this?
That's a very big question. The African, of course, I mean, if we take it from the viewpoint that there are stronger economic ties, I mean, Russia, as you said, takes a lot out of Africa and brings a lot to Africa. There are countries on the continent that Russia is supporting in their domestic security situation,
yes,
the likes of Mali,
security.
Burkina Faso, and all of that. So, I mean, it's not going to be an easy question to answer. Of course, the issue of drills. The U.S. is holding drills with South Korea, and of course, there are other countries. As pointed out, the U.S. held drills with South Africa.
So why should it be a problem?
Why should it be a problem if Russia and
China
holds drills with Africa? But I guess these are all big tent issues that would be addressed in the days to come. But I mean, I guess it's geopolitics, if you like. It
is, obviously.
It's geopolitics.
It is, but, and it's so sensitive, because decisions made at this point also affect visa policies, affect trade policies, and affect even individual businesses and all of that. I mean, it even affects sports.
Absolutely.
Remember that it's been a controversy for a lot of athletes to participate in the different events.
Sports, absolutely.
So it affects the whole country, even though this seems like policies or politics being played on the table or in boardrooms and offices, but eventually
it has this boomerang effect, long-term effect.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, you did talk about South Africa, but you also mentioned the fact that Zimbabwe is also deepening its ties, and probably a number of other countries will do so for economic benefit.
Exactly, especially now, because Russia is kind of desperate, with the cuts of European countries from its oil and gas and aluminium, and a whole lot of commodities because of the sanctions. And I think last week there was a 10th
absolutely
sanction.
round, yes.
Exactly. So it's cutting them off from their usual clients and customers. So they are seeking fresh grounds, and of course Africa is largely untapped.
Yeah.
So it's
very fresh ground. You couldn't find fresher ground than Africa.
I tell you. So I mean, Russia is looking to a whole lot of African countries to start you know, these new ties in trade and economy with a lot of offers, mouth-watering offers.
Speaking of offers,
yes.
You and I have discussed repeatedly over the last year or so the fact that India had been getting a massive, mouth-watering discount on its imports.
But, you know, I think this greed is just everywhere, because I tell you, India in the first 3 quarters of this war have saved about $2.5 billion. They're saving about $2 on a barrel of oil. But you won't believe the way they said it. It's not as much as expected. I mean, what if there was no war?
What was the expectation? Well, I guess, again, we bring it back to economics.
Yes.
It is a function of economics.
Yeah, but what if there was no war? You would have been buying oil at the official price. And, I mean,
and expected no discounts.
Exactly. You saved $2.5 billion in 3 quarters, and that's not enough.
Well, again, as you said, I mean, being economics, capitalist system, and all of that. Now, earlier on, you did mention the issue of visas and how all of this play into the geopolitical arrangement. It's not only economics, especially when you talk of sanctions. Russia, incidentally, is to ease visa procedures for 6 countries. And if you look at those 6 countries, it ties back into what we've just said.
Yes, I mean, if you're having more transactions, more people travel in and out of of 2 countries, then I mean, it makes sense for them to make it easier for the visa restrictions to be reduced, at least to encourage the trade, because that's where you're getting your money from to run your economy anyway. And also, there's another group of countries which Russia seems to be talking about visa-free.
Here we go.
And African countries are part of those.
Yes.
You have countries like Angola. You have a country like Zambia. There we go with South African countries again.
Yes.
You know, so I mean, it shows that Russia is really strategizing and looking for
offering equal carrots on one hand. So if you're looking at secondary sanctions on this side, you keep looking back at the fact that there are these carrots. These carrots are there.
Cushion some of those effects. Maybe I should just dive in and take this. But I mean, I guess it's just a time for Africa to be really careful.
And strategic.
Very strategic. And, you know, it also goes back to the conversation of Africa developing its resources. Because if we have a lot of Africans doing wonders in other countries, you know, but if you had those people developing the resources, the oil, the gold, and all of that, and you had them in Africa, then perhaps Africa will not be so happy at some of these offers, because they will be able to, you know, handle their affairs, and they will not need Russia or the Western countries to help them.
Indeed. Thank you so very much, Ini. As we always say, there are different sides to this conflict.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Ini. And when we return, despite daily shelling, Ukrainian families in frontline towns vow to stay back and not evacuate. Details in a moment. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. And in the sports, Ukraine's Marta Kostyuk has won her first WTA title with victory over Russia's Varvara Gracheva. Kostyuk, who collapsed to the court, subbing after winning the final of the ATX Open in Austin, Texas, 6-3, 7-5, dedicated the title to her country. The 20-year-old has previously been outspoken about the tennis world's response to the Russian invasion of her homeland, saying anti-war platitudes weren't enough. She refused to shake hands at the U.S. Open with Victoria Azarenka of Belarus. And finally, on the program, while some families are fleeing violence in the frontline towns, some are staying back despite the shelling. Ukrainian families in the frontline town of Orikhiv don't want to leave despite daily attacks and efforts by local police to convince them to evacuate. A 44-year-old mother, Lyubia Sencha, put sandbags in front of her living room window to protect it from explosives. She said, quote, "I live here with my children. Since the war broke out, we haven't gone to any other place. This is the safest room in the house. I sleep here with my children." Irina Krupska, another mother residing with 6 children, some of them adopted, on the outskirts of the same town, said she believed it's safer in the rural neighborhood than in the town's center. Here it's better. At the moment it's not too bad, but at night we hear loud explosions. The Ukrainian police in Zaporizhzhia region, where this town is, regularly visit frontline settlements to hand out humanitarian aid and keep contact with the remaining population, informing them about government programs for evacuees. Talk of persistence in the midst of hideous conditions. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladia Keridoluale. That's our program this morning. Of course, there'll be updates within the world today at 5 o'clock. Do watch out for that. But for now, do have yourselves a pleasant Monday morning.